Welcome everyone to the Future of Controlled Environment Agriculture. We're going to start in just a few minutes with an introduction by Gabe and Marcel. This is a true webinar, so we won't be able to see and hear you. Hopefully you're seeing and hearing us. This shows you how you can participate today. Please type any questions that you have into Zoom's Q&A. And here's a sample of your Zoom ribbon bar if you're not familiar with it. Questions will be read by the moderator for the speakers to address, and they will be read during the panel presentation. So please do ask your questions as they come up to you. Type them into Q&A. The chat is reserved for comments and discussion. If you add questions there, we might miss them. So please don't use that for Q&A. If you'd like to see everyone to see your chat, please be sure to change your to all panelists and attendees, not just the panelists through the speakers. Here's our agenda. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Welcome everyone to the Future of Controlled Environment Agriculture. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. This slide shows how you can participate today. And please note that we are recording this event for promotional and educational use by the University of California. Do type your questions into the Zoom's Q&A on the Zoom ribbon bar as they come to you so that the panelists can address them during their sessions. The moderator will read those questions for the panelists and for the discussion. Use your chat for comments and discussions. Please don't type your questions there. We might miss them. Please do add them to Q&A as the question comes to you, and the moderators will address them with their panel. If you'd like everyone to see your chat, please be sure to change your chat to all panelists and attendees, not just sending to the panelists who are your speakers today. Here's your agenda. Good morning, Sonia.
Good morning. Hi.
So we just opened up the room and we will get started. I'm going to mute you, Sonia, until your panel, okay? So good morning, everyone. We're going to get started in just another minute. Welcome to the Future of Controlled Environment Agriculture. This is a slide on how you can participate today. We'll show this again during the introduction. And please do ask your questions in Zoom's Q&A on your Zoom ribbon bar. This is a sample of that as they come to you, so that'll help stimulate the panel discussions. Here's our agenda, and it is 8 o'clock. So we are going to kick off with Gabe and Marcel to do a welcome.
Good morning and welcome to the Future of Controlled Environment Agriculture. My name is Gabe Yahtzee. I am the Chief Innovation Officer at the University of California, Agriculture and Natural Resources. Let me acknowledge also the organizations on the US side of this partnership that made today's meeting and webinar possible. In addition to UC-ANR, UC Davis College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, Washington State University, and the Washington Tree Fruit Research Commission are key collaboration partners on this and other ag tech focus area that made this possible. And I'll turn it over now to my Dutch counterpart to introduce the European side of our partnership.
Thank you very much, Gabe. And it is a pleasure to welcome you. Good morning to the people in the US and good afternoon to the people in Europe. I'm Marcel van Haaren, Program Manager Agriculture, Water and Food at FME, which is the main Dutch industry federation with over 2,200 members in the technology industry and quite a lot of them working in agriculture equipment. Since the start of this collaboration, we closely collaborate with NLWorks, and that's the public-private organization for international collaboration projects. And of course, we have a long track record of partnering with Wageningen University and Research, as most of you might know, one of the leading agricultural universities in the world, together with UC Davis, of course. Next slide, please.
Actually, go back.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So a short overview of the agenda. The objectives of today is the discussion about the industry perspective on the future of controlled environment agriculture, identify the controlled environment agriculture perspectives. Yes. Opportunities and challenges, and of course, advancing the technology road mapping and project development process. We have started together with Gabe, and the next is the industry perspective on the future of controlled environment agriculture. And this will be moderated by Leo Marcelis of Wageningen University and Jim Pantaleo of Indoor AgCon. And the 4 panelists will be introduced by the moderators. Of very interesting companies, Driscoll's, Botany, Gotham Greens, and Sensei. Then we have a summary of an industry survey which we did in preparation of this webinar. And this will be presented by Dave Bubenheim of NASA and Divine. And after that, he will also join the moderating of the science and technology needs for the controlled environment agriculture, together with Silke Hemming of Wageningen University. And companies and organizations joining in that part is Hogendorn, Plenty, and UC Davis. And after that, Gabe and I will come back to you with a short wrap-up and next steps for this collaboration. Next slide, please.
So this US-European partnership began back in 2015 with bilateral visits from the Netherlands and California governments to talk about a number of pressing topics related to climate smart agriculture, circular agriculture, ranging from horticulture to dairy, soil to robotic automation. After successive visits, events, planning meetings, and road mapping, we developed a US-European partnership for the future of food and agriculture, leveraging technology, starting with the regions of California, Washington, and the Netherlands, with hopes to expand beyond those. Next slide.
Yes, and that brings us to our mission of this collaboration is to build a global ecosystem to commercialize technology solutions to solve global challenges of food, health, and planetary sustainability. And that's starting from a big vision, but we want really to do real projects together with companies and other organizations. Next slide, please.
So our approach is about aligning industry, government, and academia or knowledge institutions in very creative and constructive ways, also known as the triple helix in Europe. Our innovation convenes diverse organizations. We develop technology roadmaps. We manage complex public-private projects and programs and foster those partnerships. The consortium's goal is to create pre-competitive action team that's going to help drive innovation forward, but also ensure that each sector can play their unique roles to build businesses, advance research and workforce development, and carry out policy and governance. Next slide.
Yes, and that brings us to our current innovation themes. We started in 2018, identifying the different themes you see on this slide. And this is the topical themes like controlled environment, which we're talking about today. Orchard automation, I will talk about it a little bit more in the next slide, and livestock and dairy innovations, which we are starting. And of course, it's also connected to the technology lines mentioned on the left side of the last.
Go back, Sherry. You're on the. There you go.
So data, AI, precision agriculture, robotics and machinery, and food and packaging waste. And our goal is to create roadmaps, to create projects, to organize training for people, and of course find resources to do these kinds of projects together with industry and academia. Next slide, please. And this is one example. 1 month ago, at the 3rd of February, we started one of the lines of collaboration with California, Washington about the Orchard of the Future, which was one of the other lines with a number 28 companies involved in this collaboration. And we are planning to set up the same kind of activity also for controlled environment agriculture. Next slide, please.
Since launching this innovation consortium, we have now dozens of companies, colleges, universities, government agencies that are a key part of the consortium with over 700 people participating. And we'd like to add all of you as well today to our growing consortium. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, you can stop sharing, Sherry. I'm going to turn it over to our first panel that is led by Leo Marcellus and Jim Pantaleo. Take it away, guys.
Thanks, Gabe. Leo, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
There he is.
Very excited, yes.
Absolutely. Leo, it's wonderful. Well, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, and we'll go from there.
Okay, yeah, so I'm very happy to be in this meeting. So my name is Leo Marcellus. I'm a professor of horticulture and product physiology at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And yeah, I do a lot of, as a plant scientist, research in greenhouses and vertical farming on how to grow better crops in a sustainable way, in a fully, and get in fact a full control over the plant. I guess I should not take more time from the speakers, I guess. So maybe Jim, your turn to introduce.
Thanks, Leo. Thank you, my friend. You're much more than that, but in that amount of time, thank you. So I'm Jim Pantaleo. I am I strong-armed my way onto this team a few years ago. At the time, I was an indoor vertical farmer at a large experimental farm in Las Vegas. I've been involved in a number of different startups and operations. I'm so pleased and grateful to be a part of this gathering. Just very quickly, I'd like to thank everybody for joining, and including those of you that are taking the time to be panelists, but also those of you who are taking time to attend this morning. So having said all that, there's 104, 105 plus of us, so that's wonderful. I would like to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. And Dr. Marta Baptista from Driscoll's, I'd like to start with you first. Please share a little bit about yourself and your work.
Jim. Thank you, Leo. Good morning, everybody. My name is Marta Baptista. I'm Vice President for Global R&D in Research Farming and Plant Research with Driscoll's. I work with our plant physiology and indoor farming research team. And at Driscoll's, we are very interested in how controlled environment agriculture may overlap with cultivars with a strong flavor background. How can controlled environment agriculture unleash the best flavor potential for our consumers in terms of that fruit quality and that fruit flavor? So I want to thank Jim and Leo the opportunity to participate on Driscoll's behalf, and we're very interested in learning more. Thank you.
Great. Can I ask a question? Can you elaborate a bit on what do you see as a future for the controlled environment in relation to the crops that of interest for you?
Yes, Leo. It may be a different sort of landscape from what we know today. I suspect it will, perhaps. Hopefully, it will be a more efficient system from the energy point of view, and we've seen those efficiencies continue to improve over the years, and so we expect those to continue. Or it may follow the path that we've seen a little bit with glasshouse production systems, where units integrate energy producing capabilities on their own. So that's something we've seen in other production systems that may follow, and that could unleash a whole new level of applicabilities for controlled environment agriculture, in our opinion. To what areas? Probably beyond the plant food production that we're seeing today, that it's around mostly leafy greens, a few fruits, etc. So we think that perhaps we're going to see controlled environment agriculture applied to plant industrial applications, to plant nurseries, which have a very high level of limitation related to geographies nowadays, at least for our crops. To plant-based protein production, just to say, a couple of examples out there. So for 10 years from now, potentially these types of production systems, plural, as I do think they will multiply and sort of get customized, have the potential to be applied way beyond, just plain food production.
Yeah, and I see in your background, I see some nice berries. I guess it are raspberries. So what do you think for the raspberries? Will they be grown more in the tunnels? What we see on the background? Do you think it will increase, or will it be more, let's say, glass houses, or will it be really completely indoor?
Well, that's a hard one. They're pretty big plants, as you can see from my background. So these crops may face similar challenges to what tomatoes or cucumbers perhaps have previously as already. We don't know if raspberries will be grown fully indoor, say in a no sun sort of production system environment, but it is possible that they will see added levels of control of the environmental factors, if that makes sense, from something very rustic or primitive, if I may, as a tunnel, to what other crops have gone through, particularly crops that occupy a lot of volume, like the one behind Silka and those other types of crops.
Guys, if I could jump in here. Thank you, Marta, so much for that. I'd like to get everybody introduced first, and then if we can jump in, we've just got about 20 more minutes. Sonia, would you mind sharing a little bit about you and your work with our attendees?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So I've been at the helm of Sensei Ag since May of last year. And excuse me, for those of you who don't know, Sensei is the brainchild of Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, and Dr. David Agus. And several years ago, they met very sadly at Steve Jobs' funeral, with whom they were both very good friends. And they decided they were going to take on the small task of improving human wellness. One side of that was sort of mind body. And so they have a whole set of retreats and content that they've been developing. And then the other side of that was food and ag, and specifically around the medical research that David has been doing as an oncologist. The two companies actually split from each other, having been under the same corporate umbrella in August of last year. Sensei is a form factor agnostic grower and developer of technology. So we believe that we should be in greenhouses and vertical farms as geographically and climate appropriate. And our goal is to grow a good basket of crops with an aim to provide a nutritionally relevant meal. Now, of course, those very broad parameters, and we're honing those down as we speak. At the moment, we stand at just under 4 million square feet of production capacity, which has been very rapid growth since May. And we have a multitude of form factors in there. So we've got high dome poly greenhouses, we've got low cost poly, we have high-tech glass house, and we will have imminently our first fully automated vertical farm. So I think that makes us a little bit unique in this sector, and we're enormously excited to be working with partners and growing some rather special food.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks so much, Sonia. Why don't we go right down the line here, Viraj?
Good morning, everyone.
There you
Great
are.
to be here. My name is Viraj Puri. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Gotham Greens. We are a greenhouse producer of leafy greens and herbs. We are headquartered in New York City and currently operate greenhouses in New York, Illinois, Rhode Island, Maryland, and Colorado. Delighted to be here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Raj. Peter, last but not least. There you go.
Okay, there I go. Technique is something. Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. To be the one that talks from the afternoon. My name is Peter Korsten. I'm the owner of the Botany Group. Botany is a research organization in the Netherlands, in the southeast of the Netherlands, with 5 locations through the Netherlands. Mainly in this area now active in vertical farming with Brightbox activities that we have from 2015. Like I said, we are not a producer, but a research company. But with Brightbox, we have a production facility, a pilot facility that we use for production of mainly herbs at this moment. And at the Matrix location, we produce at this moment mainly strawberries indoor, but we also have greenhouses, open fields, and orchards within our company.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. So I'm going to pass it back over to Leo. And just real quickly for the audience, we're keeping this very simple. We're asking our panelists essentially 3 questions. Leo started with the first one for Marta, and that is, really, where do you see this industry, controlled environment ag or indoor vertical farming, within the next 5 or 10 years from your perspective? The second question that we have is, what challenges do you see in getting there in 5 to 10 years? And finally, we have sort of a personalized question for each of them. But Leo, why don't you and Marta continue, or Peter, whatever, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I think I asked already to Marta. I was maybe a bit too early to ask that already, but so now it's maybe good if some of the other speakers also could give a bit more on, yeah, what do you think with the controlled environment, where would it be in 5 to 10 years? And if I think, yeah, I heard Sonia saying, well, you have different type of form, or well, different type of facility. So where do you think that it will move towards? Will we have that keep the whole diversity, or where do you see that the future will go to in future, let's say within 5, 10 years?
So our goals are articulated a little bit differently, very much in terms of population access, and the implications of that, of cost, of course, are cost. So our goal is to feed the top 3 quintiles of the world in the next 5 years and employ the bottom 2. Excuse me. And in the next 10 years to be able to feed everybody. Those are pretty ambitious goals given the cost basis of where we are today. And that's why we're iterating across different form factors and different crops. Mm-hmm. With regard to challenges, I would absolutely agree with Marta that energy today is a stumbling block for scalability. It's also a major stumbling block for cost. One of the kind of gross ways that we have always assumed that can be solved is through the creation of very, very large farms that become part of industrial infrastructure and that can be integrated effectively into the power system. So we see in the next 10 years, essentially symbiotic vertical farm with a power station. And the implication of that also is that you would be piggybacking on the known financing infrastructure of power stations, opening up that very valuable municipal bond market. You know, right now, the whole notion that this industry is going to scale based on venture capital is really not likely, right? It's going to have to become part of infrastructure financing, because otherwise, I think we've all seen venture cycles go up and down. I mean, I've seen it as an LP, I've seen it both as a venture capitalist as well. And the capital intensity of this industry will really require a shift in scale, size, and financing pools.
And when you say you are talking about feeding the people, so are you really thinking then about all type of crops, let's say ranging from microgreens up to corn, or what?
Probably not corn, but certainly I would see certain types of grains and definitely plant-based proteins able to be grown indoors at an economic cost.
Because I guess that will
Thanks,
be.
Sonia. You know, Viraj, I'm curious how you see yourself. I know there's just been an announcement made about California, so that's wonderful. In terms of that 5 to 10 years out, where do you see this industry based on your experience?
Exponential growth. In just a few words, I see this industry continuing to proliferate not only in the US and North America, but all around the world. I think some of the resource efficiencies of this types of production system in its different forms, hoop houses, greenhouses, vertical farms, is a very compelling value proposition in so many parts of the world, given natural resource constraints and the need to be much more efficient and productive. I think on a very small scale, I see just the industry, the subsector that we're in, which is leafy green production, shifting more and more indoors. It's often cited in our industry how retail tomatoes now are about 60% are greenhouse grown in the US and Canada. And about 30 years ago, it was under 5%. So a lot of people predict that the leafy green market will head in that direction. So I think that is relatively low-hanging fruit, I would imagine. And I think on a bigger scale, I think we're going to see a continued investment in research and development to improve technology. We've been talking about energy, my fellow panelists. I mean, it's been pretty staggering to see the reduction of cost of LED lamps, for example, which are obviously the enabling technology for fully indoor environments, or even greenhouses for that matter, to boost photosynthesis and get really consistent yields year round. So the efficiencies seem to be doubling literally year on year, which is really remarkable. We're also seeing so much investment in the genetics and seed breeding, to be better suited for indoor growing. Even when we started our business a decade ago, we were using seed varieties that have been bred for the field. And I think that's going to continue to change. So yeah, just very exciting to see so much investment in the space and so much public interest, academic interest. And I see really promising days ahead for the industry. Certainly some challenges as well, but cautiously very optimistic for the industry's growth.
We're going to talk about those challenges in just a second, Viraj, but thank you. Peter, where do you see your life in 5 to 10 years in terms of your work and your research?
Well, we started this type of research indoor about 12 years ago, and thinking of this part of development being a very suitable research tool. But that changed over the years. It's not only a very good research tool, but now we see that the customizing the equipment and customizing the production is going very fast. So it's the fastest growing part of our company because of market development. And we're now at a stage that even for European product prices, we are quite close to having a good business case at a low price green vegetable prices that we have in these areas. So that makes that my expectation is within the next 5 years that also production in the European part of the world will go rapidly up. Basically in our area, because of the effect of uniformity year-round production, that's quite suitable and quite working in this area. But it won't take over the greenhouse production, and it won't take over the corn production. But if we can reach quite a growth, I think it would be a good margin market at one hand. And of course, like Viraj said, the pricing of the installations goes down that rapidly, of lighting, but also of the other installations, that it will be a very interesting development in the next 5 years for a research company, but mainly also for production in this area.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. Leo, I'm going to turn it back over to you for to chat with Marta a little bit. But I'd like to kind of state the obvious here, which is what this collaboration really is sort of about is no different than, in this particular case, what the UC in the state of California have been involved in for well over 100 years. And we know if we go back 100 years ago in terms of technology advancements, the UC played a pretty important role in California ag, still does. And so I think this collaboration is sort of a future version of that. And so within the next 5 to 10 years, it really is wonderful to echo what Viraj has said about, collaborations with universities and research institutions. So again, thank you guys for all joining. Leo, would you mind chatting with Marta a bit perhaps about challenges?
Yes, I would like to. I'm also wondering, I see there was also in the question box a question for Sonia, but so we should also not forget that one. Sorry, should I do that?
Yeah,
one?
why don't we jump to challenges?
Yeah, okay, so let's first do the challenges. Sorry that I mixed up the other things. So sorry,
worries,
Marta.
no worries.
So, Marta, if you look at the challenges, so what do you think are the most important challenges? I think you mentioned energy. Is that the major challenge? And how can we solve that challenge, or how can we overcome that one?
Yes, Leo, I think Sonia touched upon what we see as the challenge, but also the opportunities very much. At Driscoll's, we grow under a variety of production systems, open air, plastic mulches, very basic control of the environment, tunnels, greenhouses, etc. And every single one of them has to be economically sustainable so that it scales up. And 10 years from now, just like Sonia mentioned, it will be hard to imagine that the industry will be propelled only by venture capital or mainly by venture capital, which is an area I don't know much about. I am a plant scientist person, but it's not hard to read out there. That's the big anchor of the industry right now. And so the integration into economically sustainable systems, it's the biggest challenge, but also opportunity. It's probably going to take a lot of work, or some work, from a number of actors in the landscape. But we can also think that some of the main plant-based protein and plant-based carbohydrate production systems that feed our societies today are highly subsidized, and so actually not sustainable economically either. So maybe we'll see a shift towards energy and environmental sustainability from those sort of like support from one to the other. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that economic sustainability will be the challenge to beat, in our opinion.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm just going to follow on to Marta's comment. I think also the diets themselves are not economically sustainable, right? And I think they're not sustainable from a health perspective. We know that Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, has an overly starch-reliant diet, and that causes all sorts of disease. I think we have to move towards not only a plant-based diet, which of course is better for the planet, but we have to think about the ways that we increase the amount of protein and the amount of fresh produce in people's diets. And again, I'm such a huge fan of what you're doing, Viraj, because you're bringing that necessary geographic proximity into play, right? And so we really see that the nutritional path that we have to tread is We have to create closer geographic proximity, better availability at a lower cost for most of the developed world and increasingly for the developing world, as well as be developing new germplasm that provides amplified nutrition. The other thing that I would add is I think nation states are very much going to be, as you said, Marta, players. They're going to be important players in this transformation, because unless they start to act, I think today there is a chasm between the private financing market and the public financing market. And the only people who can bridge that are going to be the state.
Yeah, and Firas, can you also add a bit on what for you are the main challenges?
Yeah, I completely agree with Marta and Sonia. Those are both challenges. So another challenge that I believe is going to be workforce development. I do think there is a dearth of trained technical talent coming out of universities, colleges, and even the industry to support this enormous growth that I think we are all striving toward globally. So yeah, just really, I think we all collectively need to do a better job of marketing our industry to young people and older people for that matter, to learn about horticulture, engineering, plant sciences, biology, to be the next pool of talent really to support this industry. And it's not just the growing, it's just all around, right? It's the business aspect, it's the automation, the engineering, the genetics. So I think for the industry to scale at this desired pace of many producers such as us and many of the investor community, I think we have to collaborate more with the universities.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And beyond our friends from the UC here, we do have folks from University of Arizona, SEAC, and others. So that's wonderful. Peter, can you comment just a moment about some of the challenges that you're foreseeing in the next 5 or 10 years? You're mute.
I'm the last one in line, so I also agree. I don't disagree on any of the other challenges, but I think for this new business, main challenge, Firas said a little bit about it. It's not only about doing the better thing for the world, but it's also about how to develop a new system, and that needs more cooperation between the different expertises than at this moment is done in this area. So I think to cooperate in between all these companies that have and universities that have a part of the knowledge will make scaling up this business possible. And I think that's a need that we see for some, well, a long term. Was the strength of greenhouse developments in the last years. And I think that's the challenge we have to meet in a business where venture capitalists are coming in, because sharing is not the first thing they think of.
Understood. Understood. Thanks, Peter. Guys, we just have about 5 more minutes, and if it's all right with you, Sonia, I have a question I'd like to pose to you from the audience. Sonia, thank you. Indeed, VCs are they will not bear the cost of expansion required to feed the globe. You mentioned municipal bonds as an infrastructure element. What other key instruments would you foresee alongside PE and debt?
I think the world doesn't need for more financial instruments. I think what the financial world needs is a data set that allows them to view indoor growing as they do a John Deere tractor. And today that data set doesn't exist. And I think until we are able to adequately inform the financial services industry about the risks of indoor growing, what each form factor actually throws off in terms of yields, what the true unit economics are of each form factor, we're going to be stuck between the VC world and the VC world. So I think that what we really need to do is to unite the industry, and we can do this anonymously, with regard to what the real efficacies are and what the real costs are, the unit economics of this industry.
Wonderful. So Leo, we've just got our individual questions for our friends, and then I think we're about to wrap. And I think we had one for Marta.
Yes.
That was the China penetration.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just to be sure that I was not mixing up. Sorry.
No worries, no worries.
So how is the expansion in towards China or global wide? So how do you see that, Marta? Can you elaborate on that?
Sure, Leo, thank you. Overall, our philosophy towards market penetration in China, which is not my area of expertise, but I'll do my best, is not, our philosophy is not very different from our basic mission at Driscoll's, which is to delight the consumer with the best tasting fruits and the healthiest ones. And this mission anchors extremely well with some of the market studies, the consumer preference studies we see out of the China consumer, where flavor is highly valued. And there are some particular preferences in terms of flavor that are very peculiar or related to the Asian markets, and that's a low tolerance for acid or sourness, and a preference for sweet, which may be or not related to sugar. That's going in a bit too much into chemistry. And so into that regard, a couple of quick considerations about controlled environment agriculture and flavor in China. How does it all come together? Well, in Southeast China, there aren't actually a lot of suitable climates to grow tasty berries. If some of you have tried to grow strawberries in hot and humid climates, you would know that it's barely, almost impossible to get any flavor out of those berries. So that could be a great opportunity for controlled environment agriculture at some level of control of that environment. So that's one aspect of it. And the other one goes back to my the first comment, Leo, about unleashing truly the genetic potential of flavor out of the berries, which we know is highly affected by climate and the fluctuation of those natural environmental factors cause most of the unreliability of flavor in the marketplace as we know it today. So those are two big opportunities that we see to put the region and the system together.
Okay, wow, great. Can I continue some more questions, Jim? So maybe to Viraj. So you're expanding in Denver, isn't it? And can you elaborate a bit on that? How is it going, and what would be a next step?
Sure. So just for the audience's benefit, when we started our business, it was in New York, and it was really to address sort of what Sonia was alluding to, which is the very long distance that a lot of the leafy greens in the United States have to travel to get from the fields in the West Coast, where the industry is really centralized, to consumers on the East Coast. So we really wanted to leverage, Dutch-style greenhouse technology to bring fresher, more nutritious leafy greens to consumers on the East Coast. But then our business has really evolved over the past decade. We started moving up and down the East Coast. We built facilities in the New England area, the Mid-Atlantic, and then started traveling west to Illinois to service the Midwest market, and then last year into Colorado to service the mountain market. And what we increasingly are finding is that it's not just the long distance transportation, but it's the other attributes that are really speaking to the retailers and the food service operators and to the consumers. It's just a much more reliable, consistent supply chain to have the products grown in close proximity to the markets, the quality of the product is much more consistent and reliable. And then a lot of the sustainability attributes are speaking to retailers and consumers. The fact that in these facilities we can grow using much less water, much less land, chemical-free, pesticide-free product. And then there have been a number of other issues coming out of the incumbent industry in California in terms of some food safety incidences, labor issues, and things like that. So we've recently just announced that we are also going to be building a facility in California, which is very exciting for us. I think when we started this business, that would be the last place on earth, I would think, to build a hydroponic greenhouse for the production of leafy greens. But what we found is that California is really the home to the produce industry and largely for the agriculture industry in the United States. So if we're going to make an impact in this industry, we want to be a part of it. We want to be in California, next to the research institutes, next to the suppliers, the breeders, and we want to be a part of that industry from the inside out. And the California is our breadbasket. It produces so much food, and we really want indoor farming to be a part of that. And we think what better place to do it than California. So we're very excited to be partnering with UC Davis. Our facility is located right next to the campus, and we're currently under construction for our first phase of what will be a 10-acre greenhouse. So very excited for our expansion.
Yeah. So I see there were a few, thanks a lot, Viraj. There are a few questions in Q&A. Marcel, we have still 1 or 2 minutes to...
Yeah, I will give you 1 or 2 minutes and then we go to the next presentation.
So there is a question about algae production. How do you see, does anybody of the speakers see what the prospects are of controlled environment for algae production? Does anybody have experience or opinions about that?
Nothing on algae, not that exciting.
No experience.
Well, having said that,
we have examined it. The issue is that the unit economics today, particularly the energy cost in vertical farming, it's very hard for algae. So right now the technology is not suitable.
thanks, Sonia. So we've run over a little bit, Leo, but I think we did okay, no?
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Great.
Well, thank you all again so much. Let us move on to our next panel. And again, sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but by all means, this is recorded, so we'll just keep going. But thanks everybody again. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for moderating this, and thank you all panelists for the very interesting topics you mentioned and the brief introductions of your companies and the interesting discussion, of course. Thanks, Jim and Leo, for moderating this. We are now moving to the next presenter. That's Dr. Dave Bubenheim from NASA and Devine. And he will start with a short summary of the controlled environment industry survey and road mapping. And after that, he will also jump into the next panel about science and technology needs for controlled environment agriculture, which will be co-moderated by Silke Hemming of Wageningen University. Dave, the word is to you for your presentation and then jump into the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcel. That was a very interesting panel. I would say that there will be items that we heard about that I'll highlight. But what I really want to do is well, first I probably should introduce myself. I'm David Bubenheim. I'm a crop plant physiologist. I've worked in controlled environments, technologies, and applications for a majority of my career. Mostly focused on NASA and developing life support systems based on plant food production and water purification and air regeneration to be able to travel to other planets. But many of those technologies have application in current terrestrial production. So a few years ago, the university asked me to get involved as an advisor in terms of looking at the future of ag and innovation. And when this collaboration began, I saw it as a real opportunity. Um, this does build on previous work that we've described in building a technology roadmap. And the purpose of the roadmap is really to align the business strategy with the technology strategies that are being pursued. And I'd like to give you an update on that effort. Next slide, please. This is directly from that previous presentation webinar, the first webinar that we had, where really described a three-step process that we're following. The first on the left is where we really utilize a process to define the scope and place some boundaries on what we're looking at, and to use the industry. This is all industry driven, to be able to then move into identifying what are the real challenges associated with each of those, each of the technologies. We try to find the key technology drivers, really identify the challenges that are there, and then identify performance targets that would be appropriate for addressing what the industry needs, and then to develop an implementation plan for the high priority items, and that where there's a time frame that would be realistic to contribute. And I think why roadmap, the real keys are to address issues that are larger than any one company. I think in this previous panel there were a number of items of energy and world diets and those kinds of topics that are really bigger than any one industry. So this is a pre-competitive technology approach that enables the business vision and also tries to remove impediments to realizing that business vision. Next, please. So the process of really getting industry input has been several-fold. We've used the webinars, the webinar discussions, surveys, and interviews. In the very beginning, the first webinar did a really nice job of being able to define the scope. And that was really focused in on pretty much an equal interest and attention to vertical farming and greenhouse production. So two very different systems, but of equal importance. And a very large push by industry to really look at what are new markets, a whole range of topics that came up in the previous panel, but really look at what's missing and what's the knowledge and technology that are necessary. And then in terms of bounding that focus, really started to identify labor as an area, markets, energy, how to manage crops to get what we really want, and then some of the associated supporting technologies, specifically regenerative systems, what's going to be necessary unique to the future markets, and energy, renewable power. Those things came up quite often. Next, please. Then a very important topic is we've been going through a series of industry interviews with either groups of representatives of companies or individuals. Many of the people you heard on the panel today have been interviewed, and many more of you will be, but really tried to understand what people see as the state of the industry. What are the key barriers to expansion, both geographic and product wise? And what are the real impediments? What's limiting profitability in the industry at the moment? Can you go to the next slide? So some of the, I think, really important topics that came out was there's appreciation that the CEA industry is young. Even though there have been lots of CEA businesses for over 40 years, there really is a push. And I don't think that industry has ever seen the scale, physical scale of production systems or the investment scale that's been available recently. And so it's really opened up a new potential. There's general broad acknowledgement that there is a reliance on core technologies, kind of cross-cutting technologies that go across all those business aspects that are of interest. And so that helps to really fit into this kind of notion of unifying an industry to create an industry vision that can help move the industry forward and the individual businesses. And there was a real acknowledgement and a desire expressed by many for that there's a need for a forum to provide communication and help develop relationships, and that could build into a unified message of engagement to go after the bigger inputs, the bigger issues, like promoting innovation that are bigger than any one company. In terms of barriers, it was recognized that there's both engineered systems and biological technologies that need to be improved, and that the system efficiency, both at component levels and integrated efficiencies, all have to be improved primarily through technologies to be able to really make the industry profitable. And some other things that came up that were interesting is that in terms of markets, some of the product labeling and that communication is limiting, and finance, as it was discussed, I think very nicely. The financial options are very limited at this time, and risk is not well understood. And so that limits investment, investment confidence in being able to support the industry. Next, please. So as part of this also, there's a supplemental survey that's out there that was put out in association with the announcement for this webinar. It identifies these topics. This gets more into some of the specific challenges and some of the solutions that the industry sees. And if you have not, I would encourage you to respond, go back and find and get that link. We'll share that again. And if you can respond, it would be very, very useful and productive. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you an idea of how this is coalescing, is coming together. The left-hand side are the drivers. So now we're working with, in this draft way, 10 areas of prominent technology drivers that are important. And then we're filling in these, with these industry information, filling in the challenges and the solutions associated with those drivers, and then working towards defining the priorities and the technical readiness. What are the gaps to really realizing those? This table expands quickly as you start to expand the challenges and solutions under those. So what I would like to do is just take the energy component of this right now and give you an idea of how that has how that's separating out. Next slide, please. So just under energy, you can see some of the challenges that have come up that have been important. These things have been just talked about in a general way by the panel discussion, and a number of the solutions, the specific solutions that have come up. This is not necessarily a totally comprehensive picture yet, but these are the kinds of things that we're trying to extract from these conversations that we have and organize them in a way that can be used to aid the advancement of the industry. Next slide, please. So to summarize this, or to give you an idea of where we are and what the next steps are, and what the process is. So if we look across the top, it's really of trying to get from where we are, we're in the midst of today, really defining the challenges and what are the technology drivers and likely solutions. And there's a process of being able to get industry input into really developing a common roadmap that can provide really represent the vision of the industry. The next steps in doing that involve a lot of people that I think are predominantly on this, viewing this webinar. Part of this is there'll be a number of technology working groups that will be put together, organized around the drivers and the challenges. And the real job there will be to have the right technical people and the right business people. So these would be industry and university researchers and supply chain industry that would be participating, and really to help define what the technology readiness is, what are those priorities, what are the gaps in being able to put one of those together, whether they're knowledge, whether they're technology, whether they're supply chain gaps, manufacturability, those kinds of things. And what is a realistic time frame to be able to bring some of these technologies. So there'll be a number of technology working groups that would develop their individual inputs to the overall roadmap. In the process would also be establishing a steering committee, which would be a group of people that would be able to provide some wisdom and oversight into this process in kind of a comprehensive view to really look at what the industry strategy is and how to use it. And again, that idea being that the technology roadmap will provide something that is pre-competitive and really is representative of the industry needs, and gives a basis to be able to go get the support that's needed to pursue some of the efforts that are much larger than an individual company, and then implement that and put a tail on the front end of the implementation to say that we can begin this process today, and this group is available and ready to help promote any collaborations that we can help support or help organize or do what we can along this vein. So hopefully that gives you a picture of, I didn't intend to explain everything and all the components, but give you a picture of what has been going on and where we need to go in the next period of time. And the kind of involvement would be significant involvement of the community to be able to do this. So that would be my last slide. Put up the next slide, please. Though, so if there's you have any questions, if you have a burning desire to participate in any of those activities, please do not hesitate to contact me or anybody else as part of this presentation. And let's have a discussion, and we'll be moving this forward, but it is the industry that's driving this. So thank you. And I think I've taken up a little more than my allotted time, but we'll be able to move on to our next panel. And that panel is really focused to discuss science and technologies for the future. And I'd like to take a breath and now introduce the co-moderator here, Silke Hemming. She doesn't need that much of an introduction. Silke has been a prime mover and force in controlled environment industry. And I think many of you know her, but Silke, please introduce yourself and get us started if you would.
Thanks, Dave, for the very short introduction. I'm very happy to be here as a moderator. And good morning to everyone in the US, and good afternoon to Europe. I'm Silke Hemming. I'm head of the research team Greenhouse Technology within Wageningen University and Research. We focus on greenhouse design for different climate zones around the world, and we cover all kinds of technologies for climate and control, but also modern equipment like sensors and intelligence, robotics, everything you need on the field of technology in order to make a business out of a greenhouse or a vertical farm, or even very simple covered structures in warmer climates. So, but I think that's enough on me, because we are here to discuss with the panel. And I would like to welcome all of them: Nate Story from Plenty, Peter Hendricks from Hogan Doorn, and Gail Taylor from UC Davis. And I would like to give the floor to each of you to introduce shortly yourself and your interest in this collaboration. Maybe I'll start with Nate. Good morning.
Good morning, thanks. So, my name is Nate Story. I'm the Chief Science Officer and one of the co-founders at Plenty. And we are an indoor farming company. So we grow indoors. Artificial light is our sole lighting source. And we've really spent a lot of time and energy and money at this point focusing on redeveloping, developing basically a new platform for growing crops. Vertical plane production, highly automated, highly sensed, highly controlled environments, and just trying to figure out how much can we squeeze out of an environment that is completely controlled.
Thank you for that first introduction. I move on to Peter.
My name is Peter Hendricks. I'm from the Netherlands, from the Westland area. So when I look out my window here, then I see greenhouses as far as I can look. I'm working in horticulture now for 20 years almost, and always in between software development in horticulture. And the last 5 years I did it at letsgrow.com, and we are a spin-off of Wageningen University, as Silke knows. And since January the 1st, I'm the CEO of Ogedan Growth Management. We deliver process automation control for energy, climate, and irrigation for greenhouses and for vertical farms.
So maybe you can also answer later some questions on the sustainability challenges which have been raised by the earlier panel. But first I would like to move to Gail. Gail, maybe you can introduce yourself. You are unmuted. You are muted.
Thanks. Hi there, my name is Gail Taylor. I am the chair of the Department of Plant Sciences at UC Davis. The department consists of 70 professors of plant science, and one of our areas of specialism that's highly relevant to controlled environment ag is breeding, genetics, and genomics. And we produce finished varieties. So we go right through from pre-breeding to sequencing genomes to actually producing plants that commercial entities use. We also have a focus in the department on post-harvest. So we run the UC Post-Harvest Center, which is an important aspect of food security. And more recently, we have a digital ag focus. UC Davis was successful in partnering to win a new institute. We just won $20 million to start the Institute for AI and Food Systems, where indoor ag is an important component of that. And that's bringing together computational scientists, engineers, and plant scientists to address some of these challenges that we've been hearing about. My own particular research for around 20 years or so, I've been working on intensive leafy green production systems and culinary herbs. So that's in both outdoor and indoor systems. So figuring out some of the quality aspects of these important high value food crops for market. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this introduction and overview. Maybe I would like to start asking a first question, coming back to Nate. If you look at the technological challenges and you have to point them out for Plenty specifically, what do you think are the major challenges you have to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Plenty has a fairly unique set of challenges because we have developed a lot of our own technology. So, the goal of our company is to build our own technology cost curve. We ride the cost curves of a lot of these other industries like big data and LEDs and, processors and sensor tech and all of these things that have their own cost curves, which drive cost out and efficiency up. But by combining those and then building a big R&D program around them, our goal is to build our own cost curve to make our industry viable, right? Make it cheaper, make it more efficient, and drive yield up. And so, in the process of doing that, we run across all sorts of interesting little technological problems, but, the bulk of them are not kind of the big fancy problems that people like to think about, robotics are maybe easier in some ways than you might think. They're very cool, and also they're somewhat simpler than some of the more banal day-to-day stuff, like how do we collect great, reliable data? How do we leverage that data to make great decisions? How do we understand how those decisions have ripple effects across the management of the farm? How are we thinking about the crop experience over the course of its life? How are we controlling for things? How are we measuring the unmeasurable, are the things that are unmeasurable today? Those are really, I think, kind of the technology problems that we end up spending most of our time and our energy on. Designing the robots is relatively easy in comparison to managing massive data sets and leveraging them to make great decisions.
Yes, and I think somebody who has some experience also with managing data sets is Peter with his company, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. Do you see that challenge as well for your clients?
Yeah, well, I think it was earlier in this meeting already that you see that the number of farms and greenhouses is growing rapidly. And it's growing faster than we can educate new growers. And that's basically one of the biggest challenges, I think, because we come in when the facility is already coming in. So you need to operate it. And then you need to operate it in a scalable, repeatable, and a sustainable way so that it becomes profitable. Yeah, and that is where you can really, if you know how to do it, where you can combine data and AI with expert intelligence, with EI, and that is the result of all the research that has been done for the last few years. And if you combine those two, and then if you educate the right experts with the right expert knowledge, then you can, in my opinion, you have the right, you have all the things you need to operate a farm, a vertical farm, or a greenhouse the right way. It's not only AI that is going to save, that's going to help with all the problems that you have, but I think that expert intelligence is a very important thing in that as well. So that
you think, oh, sorry.
No, well, I think that you need to measure the right things. And you can start easily with what is already there. And I think what Nate already said, there's a lot of things that you want to measure, because if you know that, then you can make sure that you see something before it is there. And then if you use AI to predict what is going to happen, and yeah, then you need to have the expert intelligence to know, to see, okay, what is the best that could happen? So you can change before it happens. And I think if you look at a growing a profitable crop in a sustainable way, so with the less usage of resources possible, water, but also energy and everything, yeah, then you need to have that right combination, and then you can optimize your production facility.
So do you see AI as a business game changer also for the future?
Well, it helps a lot. Well, I work for Let's Grow now for 5.5 years, and it is already for 20 years. And when I started 5 years ago, we were talking about data. Data is important. You need to do something with your data. But yeah, we were, I think, maybe one of the ones who were talking about that. And you see now that because everybody's talking about AI, you see that data is becoming more important. You see new people coming in the business with new way of thinking. So you can really see that drives that innovation part on the AI, but you need to use AI for the things where you can use it for, and not think that it will solve everything. You use it to predict and to learn, but combine it with the knowledge that is already there.
Let's check with Gail if she agrees on that. Having a new institute on AI, and you are also very familiar in handling large amounts of data if it comes to breeding and genetics.
I'll come back to AI because I think there've been some very important points, but obviously I have to kick off on the challenge of plant breeding because breeders have been largely breeding crops, food crops, for outdoor environments for around 10,000 years, and we've been very, very successful at that. So there is a challenge. Okay, we've heard that some breeding is moving towards indoor and intensive systems, but largely breeding has been developed with the outdoor agricultural system in mind. And so we have a challenge, but I would call it an opportunity to reimagine future food crops and what they might look like. And again, a lot of historic breeding has been about yield, quite rightly, and also about disease resistance, because those are the two big challenges in outdoor agriculture. And that's delivered for the world over the last particularly 200 years since we discovered Mendelian genetics. But now we can sort of wipe the slate clean, and some of these things have been brought up earlier, so we might be more interested in breeding for nutrition rather than calories. And we can address all sorts of things that previously were not perhaps possible. So personalized food, for example, that combines human health with that of plant quality. Why can we do this? Why can we imagine this world? Well, breeding is largely about genetics times management of the crop times environment. And breeders have spent 100 years grappling with the crop management and the crop environment. And suddenly we can control them in indoor systems. So that's what leads us to AI and how we can start to do what we might call speed breeding. So the sorts of breeding where we'd be grappling with these unknowns, difficult things to control, we can now jump over those hurdles. But the challenge then comes back to AI and data, because even making breeding faster and getting these predictive models, which we can do, we still have to start making the sensors, getting into the sensed environment so we can move through those breeding cycles much more quickly. So there are still challenges with bringing together the computational resources, the plant breeding people with plant breeding skills, and the engineering people for the sensors. But that's a very, very exciting area where I think there'll be huge advances in the coming decades. But the other thing I wanted to highlight was, you know, we're always going on about costs and energy and so forth, but I think we should start seeing indoor ag more in terms of the bioeconomy, where, you know, I'm also very interested in bioenergy and carbon capture and storage. And we need to start thinking about the circular economy and how we can place indoor ag in a much wider system, do some more systems thinking where we're talking about how we utilize carbon, how we capture it, how we utilize excessive heat in district heating systems, and all sorts of ways how we utilize you know, anaerobic digestion, and then we can start to match up some of these technologies. So those are the challenges for me.
Thank you very much for summarizing them, touching a lot of elements. I would like to come back to that element of sensing, because we also have a question from the audience, and that's particularly for Nate. What do you think are the unmeasurables from your perspective?
Yeah, so when I say unmeasurables, there are some things that are, nothing is really unmeasurable entirely. Things are just, you know, difficult to measure. There are some things that are difficult to measure, I'll put it that way. And so, you know, these are things like, what is, you know, for our crops, how do we measure environmental conditions, temperature, humidity, VPD, light intensity through a plant canopy of a plant in production as it moves through space, as it's processed and handled without wiring that plant up, right? Like that's an example. And we're driving densities, and we have a system that's sensitive to nuance to the extent that understanding the condition throughout the plant canopy is necessary. We can't just understand what's happening at the top of the plant canopy. We need to understand what's happening within it. So that's one example. Another example would be nuances related to workers, right? So different workers have very nuanced, sometimes almost indiscernible ways of engaging in a process. And those nuances can have meaningful impacts on the outcome. Some of those things are observable and measurable. Other things are less observable and measurable. And so even thinking, there's the plant, all the biology of the plant, there's the biology of the people. And then there's things like, system inputs, and getting really finicky around things like what is the exact, the composition of the medium that we're using. Does it have the right number of particulates of the right size in the right ratios and balance to each other? These may be splitting hairs in systems that are maybe a little less sensitive, but ultimately, as we drive higher and higher yields, we discover the system becomes more and more and more sensitive to any form of disturbance. Disturbance being, departure from the mean, or departure from kind of the average treatment. So, for us, most of those immeasurables or hard to measure items tend to fall into things that people either haven't had to think too much about or haven't had to build the equipment to measure before.
Yeah, and making a good interpretation of the data coming out of that in terms of your crop growth and maybe also your labor, what you mentioned. Yeah.
And
Dave, I would like to,
sorry. Oh, and diagnostics and attribution, right? So when we do see changes in an incredibly complex system with thousands and thousands and thousands of data sets that relate to that particular plant, perhaps understanding what matters.
Yeah. Dave, I would like to handle over to you because I'm asking all the questions. I think you had now had time to recover.
Thank you, Saka. It's been a great, very interesting, and actually much of that discussion is pertinent to a whole series of questions. I think all of them have come up in the question and answer section. One of those was an offshoot from when I talked about drivers and asking about IT management and automation and how important that was. And I would say that I'll just comment that both of those are individual drivers in technology. You just had to go through those things quickly. But it led to the perfect discussion about what is unmeasurable. And I think what I'm kind of getting through some of these questions is wondering whether AI is a bit of a topic that we're hiding behind in really going after some of these unidentified measurables or difficult to measure topics. So I think the team commented, the panel commented on those aspects that were very interesting. I'm wondering, there are a number of times the topic of nutrition and flavor came up. I know companies like Plenty, Nate, pride yourselves on being able to provide very unique flavors and consistently provide those over time in product production cycles. And I'm wondering, I think across the board to all the panel members, and since I introduced Nate and then maybe Peter after that, and then Gail, is if you could talk about the technologies necessary to provide that, a little bit about understanding of what's there, and is the market there right now? Do you see a path? Is there economic support for that distinct product, or do you see a path to increasing that market? So that's Nate, could you start that?
Sure. So I think that's a great question. And, AI becomes kind of this very nebulous general term that's often used to just describe complicated data analysis that we don't want to talk about or understand, and sort of just kind of, shove it off into this concept of AI. But at the end of the day, any type of analysis depends on understanding, what is true and understanding the relationships between variables to some degree or another. And so, in our farms, we have had to approach it in some rather original ways. This data collection, this fundamental understanding of what is true, right? We've had to approach it in some fundamental ways. We've built our own sensors, our own wireless, teeny tiny little wireless sensors that travel through the farm. They travel on the product. They go here, they go there. They tell us whether we're hitting the environmental variables they want. We can measure, conditions throughout the plant canopy. with these things. And there's sometimes, there can be thousands of them, depending on the problem that we're trying to understand and solve. Another thing is we've built our own kind of fluorescence setup where we can, build relatively inexpensive devices that go through and basically give us feedback directly from the plant, as it relates to stress, as it relates to light intensity, as it relates to spectrum and kind of how effectively we're driving, photosynthetic processes in the plant. So all of these have been a response from us to figuring out what is true at the plant level or what is true at the facility level in a ways that allows us to truth check our kind of hardened systems, right? So there's all of the general engineering of the facility, all of the wired in sensors, all of the stuff that keeps the facility running. And then we've had to kind of build everything else that allows us to understand, one, how efficient are we being biochemically? And then, two, is the data we're getting from our primary systems true? Or is it false? And to what degree?
I wanted, could you quickly just talk about the market and relate to the flavor quality, and then I want to ask Peter about the technology that he's seeing people purchase.
Yeah, the market for flavor is waking up, right? People, especially, I think recent events have really gotten people thinking about their health. I think humans are basically giant sensor systems. And we are optimized to survive and reproduce. And part of our survival is staying healthy and staying strong. And our tongues tell us what's good to eat, what's healthy and what's not healthy, generally speaking. And so, the focus on flavor is really a focus on health. They can't be unlinked from each other. And, for us, it's really about giving people really amazing flavors, oftentimes flavors they haven't experienced before. So, one way that we talk about is, we've been breeding tomatoes now for a couple of years. And when I tell people we're breeding tomatoes, they kind of go, oh, well, okay, whatever. I've had tomatoes. Tomatoes aren't exciting. And I have to remind them, I'm like, tomatoes are a tropical fruit. And when you try our tomatoes, you will be reminded that tomatoes are a tropical fruit. And you will be reminded of what it's like to eat something from your mother's garden, your grandmother's garden, right? Like these very kind of ancient flavors, these flavors that are embedded in our memory somewhere that we don't get to access very often, simply because that's not a common experience. And so as a company, we want to go and want to give people those experiences back. And for folks that have never had those experiences, we have a unique opportunity to show them what really incredible greens can taste like. Those are not products, that you link with flavor very often, but in the minds of our consumers, they become linked. Same thing with strawberries. We're working with Driscoll's right now on a pretty meaningful strawberry research program, and then, internally on our tomato breeding. This is all flavor focused.
Right. Thank you. Let's jump over to Peter, if we could, right now. If you could speak a little to what are people asking for, in terms of nutrition, being able to control nutrition of products or flavor, or what are the trends that you're seeing?
Well, what we see right now is that I think when we look at control the systems, what we do for irrigation and for climate and for energy, and then there are a lot of sensors that measures everything like temperature, humidity, and all the things that Nate said. And what we see the last few years really coming up is also that they cut the leaves and they bring it to laboratories to measure everything that is inside the plant, and that is really something new. And well, it's now for a few years, but it's coming mainstream at the moment. And that also gives more focus to what's happening underneath the plant. So we can see everything. We can steer. We can do optimal photosynthesis. We can steer for a beautiful, good-looking crop. What's happening underneath at the root zone? What are we giving the plants? How are they doing the water uptake and the uptake of the nutrition? I think that is something that there's still quite a world to win there. And also for the, I think for the science part, there is a lot of research to do on that specific part, because that all relates in the end to back to the flavor again.
Right. That's maybe a perfect segue to Gail to talk a little bit about what's kind of the state of research. And actually one of the questions that came up that we're on the same wavelength here is we talk about flavor, we talk about nutrition. There are some other of these markets like being able to address medicinal application, just being able to produce some pharmaceuticals. Could you talk about a little bit of the state of that and where you're involved, which aspects?
Well, as far as biopharma is concerned, we're not actively there, but it is a good exemplar. It's a good example of, the move to high value products and how these systems could be much more effective. I just wanted to return to the AI question and how it's influencing plant breeding. There's been a revolution in DNA sequencing, as many of you may be aware. So when I first sequenced a genome, it was with a big consortium. It cost $35 million for one genome. I just sequenced the genome of watercress and it cost less than $10,000. So suddenly we have millions of DNA markers that tell us all about plants. But the thing we don't have is the phenotype of the plant. So going back to what Nate was saying, understanding the plant and how it's intimately involved with the environment and how we can use those markers to best breed plants for these environments. And that's for food and for pharma and for any use. So the AI challenge for us is being able to understand these very big DNA data sets and placing them in the context of plant performance to breed much faster for these environments. So that sort of answers that question. I just wanted to pick up on Nate's point on tomatoes having flavor. Of course, at UC Davis in my department, we run the RIC Center. We have the best germplasm collection globally of tomato. But I've been reading some of the old journals of Rick and predecessors of him packing up his family every summer and taking them off to the tropics and the semi-tropics, looking for those wild relatives that we've used to breed modern tomatoes. So yes, let's not forget flavor and let's get it back in there.
Thank you very much. I think it's time to wrap up this panel discussion. I think we discussed a lot on the genetic part, on the plant reaction, which is the basic at the end. We want to provide to the consumers good, personalized and tasty foods. And I think in this panel, we learned that different types of technology, sensing and intelligence have to come together to make a good future. And I think with that, we have a good combination also for the collaboration on the long history of agriculture, horticulture production as well in California as in the Netherlands, and also the different technologies on both sides, which we could bring together. Anything you want to add, Dave, from your side? Otherwise, I hand over again to Marcel.
I would, if possible, I would like to hear in 1 or 2 words, 4 maximum, from each panelist. Are there any big items, big things that are bigger than you as individuals that you think would really have an impact in your area as a grower, a supplier, a researcher, that would have huge impact for you, for the industry, for the future in that area? Gail, would you mind starting that?
I'd say make the plant and the food and the crop central rather than the sort of engineering and the technology.
All right, Peter.
Well, to be quite honest, I totally agree with Gail because we supply the book Plant Empowerment. I don't know if you read it, but that's what we write in the book, put the plant central, give him what he wants, and then you get the sustainability itself.
Okay, Nate, last word.
Someone solve for sustainable packaging, please. And then, I'll always take more capital. So, but the plants are great. It's all for the plants.
Well,
Thanks all of you. I think we have to hand over to Marcel and Gabe again.
we do.
All right, 5 minutes left, I promise. Thank you all so much. Those were incredible discussions, both first and second panel. Sherry, please share the screen with the remaining slide. 2 slides. All right, where do we go from here to build this consortium? We'll start by launching the technology road mapping process this spring, beginning with the formation of a steering committee and then development teams. Hope that many of you will agree to participate and co-create this with us. Our goal is to have these first chapters of that roadmap published later this year, culminating with the formalization of collaboration agreements and first projects early next year. Of course, given that this is a consortium of many parties and we have a very uncertain work environment, these things may change. The key takeaway here is that we are keeping the focus on building and maintaining momentum for this group and consortium. Expected outflows from the consortium include joint development projects, new innovation facilities, research projects, and novel training approaches for the CEA industry. Next slide.
Yes, thank you, Gabe. And already mentioned in the roadmap picture on the last slide, our next steps are forming this steering committee. And that's an activity which we will do the next few months. And also to invite you to join the road mapping process, which will start this spring. But the road mapping is one aspect. The other aspect is that we also want to start projects, and not only after the roadmap is finalized, but if we find some project that we can do together meanwhile, that would be helpful also. So on the screen you see 2 different links. One is for if you want to join the Innovation Consortium. Please use the upper one, and the lower one is about our newsletter. Many of you received the newsletter, but not all of you. We will also try to include you if you want, but if you want to join the newsletter or know somebody who should read the newsletter, please feel free to use this link for it. Next slide, please. Yes, and that's I think, Gabe, the first word is to you, and I do the second one.
Right. So this concludes our session. We thank you very much for your time today. I posted those links that Marcel referred to in the chat window if you didn't catch them. We look forward to next steps toward that plant-powered future. On behalf of the planning team, thank you, and have a wonderful day or evening. Marcel, last word.
Yeah, and from my side, I want to thank all the panelists, the moderators, and all people working on this webinar, which is the next step in our great collaboration, which already started in 2018. We have a large group of already committed and already participating organizations. And I think this kind of partnerships all over the world can help to make the world a better place and to grow food in a more sustainable way. And yeah, we look forward to continue this mission with all of you. And I want to have some closing words to the 6 pictures you see in the screen, and the people who did all the work to get to this webinar, the preparation, besides from the panelists and the moderators. I want to thank David Bubenheim, you also saw him presenting, my colleague Jacqueline van Oosten, who is doing a lot of preparation and also is having a lot of contact with companies. Daniel da Costa of Enel Works, already mentioned him in the beginning of the webinar, and of course Jim Pantaleo with a lot of knowledge from the indoor aircon and the sector as well. So on behalf of Gabe and myself, I want to thank you all and have a good evening in Europe and a good morning, rest of the morning in the US. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.